We begin with the fast approaching deadline for the latest tariff threat. U.S. President Donald Trump's 50% levies are to hit some Canadian goods in just 2 weeks, unless there's some kind of deal. Today, the Prime Minister was asked if Canada should change its strategy.
This is a negotiation, and this is not the time to change. We have time. We have real constructive negotiations that are happening.
All right, the CBC's Kate McKenna is following this. She joins me now. Kate, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. Prime Minister gave a little more information today about what Canada's goals are at the negotiating table. What stood out to you?
Well, I do want to underscore that it was truly just a little more information.
Slightly.
Just a little more information. He really is holding his cards close to the chest on this one, but he confirmed that he personally is quite involved in the ongoing talks. We heard in that clip, once again, not ruling out potential retaliation, and also saying that they're not just talking about this new tariff threat, this new 50% threat on about $28 billion of Canadian exports. They're also talking about how to get relief for tariff-stricken sectors. We're talking about steel, we're talking about aluminum, we're talking about wood, we're talking about autos. All of those things are currently on the table. That sort of jives with what we've been hearing, the sparse details that we've been hearing from U.S. Canada Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who described his conversation with his American counterpart last week as comprehensive. We know that's what they want. We don't know what they're getting at this time. You know, he was asked straight up, do you think that we're going to get a deal ahead of this August 19th deadline? And he said, we'll see. So these negotiations still underway. Canada really, both in public and behind the scenes, not wanting to tell people, not wanting to tell journalists exactly what is on the table, what they're dealing with, but saying that, you know, progress is happening behind closed doors. Whether or not we'll see that in the form of a deal by August 19th remains to be seen.
And the reason we're talking about this so much is that Minister LeBlanc has returned to Washington, his second time in 2 weeks. What do we know about some of the meetings that he's been having in his time in Washington?
So his office did confirm some of the meetings that have happened. He's met with 2 Republican senators, Bill Haggerty and Kevin Cramer, as well as the U.S. National Association of Manufacturers. We're still waiting to see whether or not he's going to meet with his counterpart, Jamieson Greer, as he did last week. It's interesting, though, Katie, all of the sources that I've been speaking to over the last 48 hours have highlighted to me that this is an open-ended trip. He hasn't booked a return ticket yet. What does that mean? Does that mean he's got stuff that maybe isn't fully booked, but could be happening behind the scenes? Probably these are not the only negotiations that are happening, because these are not the people who would be able to make decisions on behalf of the U.S. government. So something that we're tracking for sure. The other thing, there was reporting in the Globe and Mail today about potential export quotas on steel and aluminum metals. I had also been hearing some of that from sources that those discussions were happening, but 2 government sources told me today that that does not reflect the current talks that are being held between Canada and the U.S. These things are very much in flux as well. Jean Charest, the top Canadian negotiator, also at these tables, but certainly remains to be seen. I mean, we'll be tracking this all week, depending on what other meetings Dominic LeBlanc is having.
Yeah, meeting with Senator Kevin Cramer. Canadians have met with him many times. He's viewed as a friend of Canada. He's a close ally of Donald Trump. But in terms of sort of, you know, changing the tone and getting things done, you know, it's always good to meet with people who are close with President Donald Trump. But at the same time, that so far has not necessarily worked. Kate, I suspect we'll talk tomorrow, and I suspect we'll talk on Friday too, because who knows? So thank you very much for your time today.
Looking forward to it.
As Kate said, Prime Minister Mark Carney is saying it's time for trade talks to intensify. But with the deadline quickly approaching, what options does Canada really have? Jean Charest is the former Premier of Quebec and a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Canada-U.S. economic relations. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Charest. I just want to start with a question about, you know, this is the second trip for LeBlanc and Ms. Charest in 2 weeks. How do you read that?
I think it's a good signal. And all of this comes from the last announcement of President Trump for a new wave of tariffs with a deadline of the 19th of August, a conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Carney where they both agreed to engage in more intense negotiations. And that is exactly what is unfolding at this point. The challenge for us in Canada is to have a comprehensive discussion on the overall relationship as opposed to just engaging on single issues where the American side just whittles away on different positions. So overall, I think it's a positive sign. And I'm not surprised, by the way, that they want to keep their cards very close to their chest, given the volatility of some of the people involved. It's probably a good idea to advance the discussions and to speak up when there are things to deliver.
Something you mentioned in that answer, talking about, how the Americans will focus on a single issue and Canada needs to come in with sort of a broader approach. I don't want to describe it as Groundhog Day, but it kind of seems to be this trade war Groundhog Day where the Americans come in, they make a big, bold threat, and Canada has to try to find a way to escape the threat while at the same time trying to keep CUSMA alive. How does Canada turn the tables? How does Canada change that power dynamic so that it's not constantly having to just try to fight back like this?
And the word power dynamic describes it very well, Katie. The Americans are a superpower and they're much bigger than we are. We have to be more strategic, we have to be smarter, and we have to be patient. And that's what I'm seeing right now. And what does that mean? It means that rather than just engaging on a piecemeal basis, we need a broader discussion. We always have wanted to have a discussion, Katie, that would include defense, security, strategic minerals, not just a specific tariff. And if you roll all of that in, that it makes sense that we have an agreement that speaks to the interest on both sides. And the other part of it, frankly, is that we have to be patient in the sense that we could sign a deal today. We could probably sign a very bad deal today and live with that bad deal a very long time, as opposed to accepting the fact that, yes, there's going to be some uncertainty, but better to be very perseverant, very resilient, stick at it, and make sure that we bring them constantly back to the broader relationship and get a good deal for both sides.
Okay, something you said in that answer that stands out to me is what you're describing is the approach that you would suggest Canada take. That was the approach that Mark Carney took at the start when he first became Prime Minister. He wanted to go to the White House to have a conversation, reach some sort of broader economic, defense, strategic sort of plan, while at the same time, make sure that CUSMA gets renewed and that all stays the same. But that sort of blew up last summer after the meeting in Kananaskis and that kind of proposal was made. Deadlines were missed. Everyone was hoping that Canada could sort of achieve something like that, but it blew up. It didn't work. Are you saying that the Canadian government in this moment has gone back to that approach, the one that blew up last year?
We always stayed on that approach. The difference in what you're describing is that we were engaged, then disengaged. Now we are re-engaged. And this is from a conversation that the President had with Prime Minister Carney. It was after his announcement of this new wave of tariffs. There is a deadline, and everywhere, but in the American political system in particular, Katie, and you know this very well, a lot of happens if there's a deadline that you're working against. We have the 19th of August. So I'm encouraged by the fact that we are re-engaged. Both Jean Charest and Dominic LeBlanc are on the ground and doing the work that needs to be done. We just have to be very, very resilient as we do this. Overall, we continue to have the best relationship of all countries, though it's not a great consolation when you know the fact that we're suffering in the steel sector, aluminum maybe a bit less. In the forestry sector, it's a pretty bad situation right now overall in Canada, and I can tell you here in Quebec, where I'm from, it's pretty dire. But if we're perseverant, we can probably arrive. And there are things working for us. There are midterm elections coming up. Cost of living is a big issue. Tariffs contribute to increasing the cost of living. There's the conflict with Iran. That is also a contributor to some of the grief that is felt by American consumers. If you add all of this together, there are good reasons on the American side to come to a conclusion with Canada and send a positive signal to their own consumers that they're making progress on some issues.
And I just want to clarify something you said in that answer as well. All of your answers here seem to be wielding new information, and I greatly appreciate that. Are you saying that after that phone call that President Trump and Prime Minister Carney had, that actually restarted a conversation to get back to a broad discussion about a broader defense, economic, security kind of deal?
That phone call resulted in us re-engaging. And now you go further by saying on the content, a broader deal. Not necessarily on the American side, but from our perspective, yes. But the phone call did create an opportunity, a re-engagement on both sides in these negotiations. And that's what's happening right now. And both sides would be wise to keep their cards close to their vest, not get ahead of themselves. And this will be difficult, I know, for the media, but it's probably wise to keep this negotiation on track and make it productive. And there is a date of the 19th of August by which we need to come to an agreement.
What more can you tell us about that phone call?
Well, the American president seems to want to I think, further engage within the administration with all the actors. We're thinking of Secretary Bessent, for example, would be and is, I think, involved in these negotiations. I know there have been conversations with Secretary Bessent. Remember, he is the one who led the negotiations with China. He's the one who convinced in Mar-a-Lago a year ago to the American president to descale with China the tariff war that had engaged, that turned into an embargo. That is also a positive sign. It's a good sign that the whole of administration is more engaged in these negotiations than they were before that phone call.
Tell me more about who Scott Bessent has been engaging with. Has he been meeting with Dom LeBlanc? Has he been meeting with Jean Charest?
I can't confirm any meetings with Janice Charest or LeBlanc, but there have been conversations. I can tell you there have been conversations, which is a good sign.
What are you looking for over the course of the next 2 weeks to see signs of progress? Are we going to see anything publicly as this timeline ticks down?
The sides, and the Canadian side would be wise to avoid creating public expectations. I think they're working to get some progress and an agreement and not say or do anything that will be a distraction in these negotiations. All your listeners, and you, Katie, who are in Washington, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. We have a very volatile situation on the American side, and that's just the way it is. So let's be strategic and let's be intelligent about this and make sure that as we're engaging, we're talking, that we not go out there and say or do anything that is going to become a distraction, and focus on the 19th of August and trying to produce an agreement.
If there isn't something that Canada can point to as a deal by August 19th, do you think Canada should, fight back with more retaliation?
Everything's on the table. Prime Minister's made that clear. Everything is on the table. We are one of the few countries in the world that's actually applied counter tariffs in the automotive sector and elsewhere. We've continued with that. And by the way, when we do that, Katie, just to be clear, we're very aware. We hurt ourselves. We know that. But it's part of what we need to do to be able to defend ourselves. So everything remains on the table, and we just have to be very perseverant. If we don't get a deal on the 19th of August, we continue to be the country that has the best treatment among all countries. Not a great consolation if you're affected by tariffs in steel, aluminum, or the forestry sector, but still that's the situation. We do not fall off a cliff. We just have to keep working at it until we finally come to a conclusion.
Is there any other news that you'd like to share with us, Mr. Charest? I feel like we got some more insight. It's been so hard to get information, and because I do this every day, it's been so hard to get information about what's going on. And in one hand, I understand the strategy and it makes sense, but at the same time, we're so eager to get some details because Canadians voted for Mark Carney based on his handling of the Donald Trump, and so Canadians want to know what is happening and how things are going. So, is there anything else? Do you want to make any news or anything else you want to share?
But we get all that. But every Canadian listening to us today also knows, for having watched this for the last year and other mandate, how Mr. Trump is. I mean, that's just the way things are. In the meantime, though, let me share some advice or recommendations. If you're a Canadian and you're out in the marketplace this week, you're at the grocery store, by all means, buy Canadian, buy Canadian, buy Canadian. If you feel that, we all feel a little helpless with what's happening, you're not. We can all do something in a small way that is going to help our neighbors and our friends, and that is to support whatever they're producing at your local farmer's market, and the grocery store, at a store, anywhere we go. Buy Canadian, Katie.
Jean Charest, former Quebec Premier, thank you for your time today. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada has options if a trade deal with the U.S. isn't made soon. But until then, he says Canada will stay the course in negotiations.
We will do everything that proves to be necessary if there is no possibility of an agreement by the 19th of August. This is a negotiation, and this is not the time to change.
U.S. President Donald Trump's 50% tariffs on a variety of Canadian goods, they are set to go into effect in just 2 weeks. And provinces are drawing their own red lines on negotiations with the U.S. as well.
Make no mistake, our resolve is firm that any sort of move on alcohol is paired with landing a deal with the United States.
All right, it is time for the Power Panel. We are joined by Amanda Alvaro. She's a former Liberal Party communications strategist. And in our Ottawa studio, we've got Tim Powers, who worked as a strategist for Conservative parties, and Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist. Welcome, everybody. Let's start. Amanda, tell me what you make of Dom LeBlanc's second trip to Washington in 2 weeks. If he doesn't get a meeting with members of the administration, is it even worth it?
Well, I think what we're hearing is that he's meeting with lawmakers and industry leaders and people who can apply pressure and can influence. And that's how good old-fashioned diplomacy is done. And I think that face-to-face time is really critical. I mean, a deal that's worth trillions of dollars is not going to be made in a single meeting. We know this. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And yes, businesses want certainty, but they also want to know that we're getting the best deal for Canadians to protect manufacturers and workers and exporters for years to come. So I think these are the right signals, being on the ground, getting those influential circles aligned, using every pressure point that you possibly have to continue these negotiations with the U.S.
Tim, the Prime Minister says that now is not the time to change course. What do you make of that? Do you agree with him?
Well, I don't think we know enough to agree or disagree, right? I mean, you cover this every day. You know more than the three of us do. And half the time, probably more than half the time, there's just a barrage of misinformation or uncertainty, particularly coming from the White House. So where are we in all of this? Who knows? I mean, by old metrics, you might say constant trips to Washington and the frequency of those trips increasing is a good thing. But you're dealing with Donald Trump, and you've been in the Oval Office. You know that's a carnival ride with its own dimensions. I mean, I think Dom LeBlanc, Jean Charest, Doug Ford, anybody, the more we talk to Americans, more American leaders, particularly in swing states and senators and Congress people from swing states, that's all vital stuff. Go talk to Dana White, for God's sake. That might help us. The UFC promoter, he talks to Trump all the time.
I think they're together on stage today in Vegas.
There you are. Just don't get into ultimate fighting. All to say, it's hard to tell. It was interesting today, though, or it may have been last night, the Globe story that came out where perhaps deliberately, Katie, some information leaks suggesting, well, here's what we might be doing on steel and aluminum. And in part, that may be a test balloon for the Americans, but equally it's to show Canadians, I think, those who may be agitated, that they are working on things, that they are looking at solutions. But again, I suspect August 19th will come and go, and there won't be necessarily a hell of a blah over all of that. That will still be in this place of uncertainty. Things may get moved out, and maybe that's the win we should be looking at now.
Jordan, what do you think?
Well, I think it's too early to know really what the intensifying meetings mean because, of course, anything can be happening in those conversations. I do think, though, that the intensity of the contact represents a change from what we've seen from the Carney government over the last few months. Since the fall, there's been a real backing off and sort of space was given and everything was really left. What we're seeing right now, of course, is in response to the wave of new tariffs that's been announced for the end of the month. And I think that you're also seeing among the Canadian public growing support for some kind of a pushback against the Americans. The Carney government has given a number of unilateral concessions to the U.S. over the last year, so things like the digital services tax, and just last week, of course, canceling the requirement for profitable streaming services like Netflix to contribute to Canadian content. So these are things that Canadians see that we're giving these things away. We're not necessarily getting anything back tangibly from the Americans. In fact, we are now being hit by
with more.
Another round of
but
tariffs.
Wait, there's
so
more.
It's not clear that it's transactional.
Yeah.
That we, it's not a logical relationship where we give something and we get something back. And so I think that means that the Carney government is likely pursuing several tracks at once. They're in these talks, they're in these negotiations, but you also see the Prime Minister out taking a bit of a harder line in terms of what he's saying about the potential for retaliation if it comes down to that.
That's something that came up with one of the provinces today in Ontario. The finance minister there said that there's a red line around the alcohol ban there. Amanda, do you think that, we do know that the Trump administration is irritated with those alcohol bans, and that's part of their retaliation upon retaliation strategy when this trade war ratchets up? Do you think that the provinces, I know that it would be deeply unpopular with Canadians, but in order to maybe start a constructive conversation, should Canada be offering up, should the provinces maybe back away from some of those booze bans as a way to sort of maybe foster a goodwill moment with the Americans? Is it worth it?
I mean, perhaps, but it's so hard to say. And I think some of the most important progress is and can be completely invisible to us. It's negotiations and talks that are happening in closed door meetings that we won't know about until an agreement is reached. I think it was also interesting to hear some of the critics saying, like, how many trips is too many? And it's like, well, as many trips as necessary to get this deal done. And whether that includes members of the provinces or it's the negotiating team of Carney's office, whatever it takes. But this is about preserving relationships. It's about narrowing those differences. And it's really about creating the conditions for a deal. But again, whether or not alcohol is on the line, or we know that the Prime Minister created his own red line last week when he talked about, energy not being on the table. Sounds like alcohol as an irritant is one that may be working a bit. So maybe they're leaving it there. I don't think this is all about Canadian concessions. I think the government has pushed back where they feel they can push back. But again, this only time is going to tell where this deal lands.
Earlier in the program, we did an interview with Jean Charest, and he seemed to reveal new details about what was going on, because so much of what is happening is not being shared publicly. One thing I do know is from our coverage in the U.S. is every time it really irritates the Americans when the Canadian media shows up outside the offices of Howard Lutnick.
You don't irritate people, do you, Katie?
I am so loud. What? I am so irritating.
This is hard to believe.
Oh, no. It actually hasn't been me so much lately. It always happens when
Blame Paul Hunter.
It's who's the loudest man in the room.
That's right.
My loud voice doesn't irritate him at all. But it's one of the, so the Americans have stated to the Canadians that it's something that they don't appreciate. And so that's why I think that, because it's such big news in Canada, that we sort of, the way we treated NAFTA negotiations back during Trump 1.0, we sort of did it like hockey updates. We're like this and this and this. It was so because it was so vital to the Canadian economy, and it means so much more in Canada than it necessarily does in the United States. Yes, it's important for the American economy and the certain American sectors, but certainly the news cycle is so much bigger and faster there that it doesn't get the same kind of attention. But to the point I'm trying to getting to an actual question here, Tim, we heard from Jean Charest, who shed new light talking about how Scott Bessent is involved. I don't think we knew much about that, if we did know anything about that. But he also seemed to talk about sort of going in with a broader goal. He didn't say that we're exactly rehashing an attempt to get a security and economic kind of deal here. But do you think that there's any sort of merit in Canada saying, okay, listen, you guys put forward all of these little things you have issues with. You want to put tariffs on this. You've got tariffs on the steel sector, all these different industries, and we're still trying to save Kuzma. Do the Canadians need to go in with one big, broad sort of like picture solution here? Or is it just you got to hit every single irritant at sort of the root of it?
I'm sure they have a number of scenarios. In every trade negotiation, you have a number of scenarios, and you look at where you can get your early wins, what's going to be more difficult to do. I think for a lot of people in Canada that are impacted now in auto or steel or aluminum, they would like a reprieve. So if there's victories to be had there, why wouldn't you go for those first? I mean, from everything Donald Trump has said, and again, it varies from moment to moment, as you know better than anybody, it is hard to think that a big comprehensive approach is going to work right now. Find wins, build trust, find allies if you can. And there are probably still some in the administration and people from different states who are helping those in the administration. But I don't think there's one perfect strategy. And that's why, though the opposition's job is legitimately to criticize the government and say, what's your negotiating approach? The government should say, shag all about it. They should take the heat that they're getting from the media and others, because the worst thing they could do is dump it all into the public realm, because that only benefits Donald Trump and the U.S. administration and perhaps causes more irritation than any benefit it provides.
Jordan, if Canada can't get out of this new tariff threat with the 50% on some $28 billion Canadian worth of goods, is it time to look at more supports for industries that are going to be hit by these?
Absolutely. And also more supports for the workers that are impacted, not just by these new tariffs, but by the initial waves of tariffs as well. The effects of those haven't necessarily been felt equally across the country. They have been very acute, particularly in places like southwestern Ontario and Quebec, some parts of northern Ontario as well. And in a lot of cases, the government has made some effort to go out of their way to support the industry. But really, a lot of the people who are employed in those sectors, who are facing layoffs or job uncertainty, haven't received the same level of urgency for assistance. So that's something I think that the government is going to need to fold into their considerations here if that comes to pass. But of course, I think that their efforts are well directed right now in trying to prevent those from coming into force. The fact that there was a delay between the president's announcement and the imposition of the tariffs is an opportunity for the government to push back. And I think that there is an appetite, not just among Canadians, but among many premiers, to take a bit of a stronger stance. And again, that we've really seen that those preemptive concessions have not garnered Canada better treatment. And so if you want a different result, they may be looking at different means to get there.
There is a political calculation that we have to sort of take a look at. And Amanda, I want to ask you about if there's no sort of deal and Canada does get hit again, at the end of this month, we've got 3 by-elections coming up. Could this be something that ends up, I know that at least 2 of the seats are expected to go Liberals' way, but could this pose a bit of a challenge for the Liberals heading into those by-elections if this is like another blow by the Trump administration to Canada?
I mean, I still feel like Canadians are on side with the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's approach. And you look at the polling, and it doesn't suggest in any way that Canadians are losing faith or trust in this approach. I don't see that changing in the next 2 weeks. I think that the volatility of Trump, the impression that people have of Trump, the fact that everyone agrees that, at any given moment on his whim, things could go one way or another. I don't think that the Prime Minister is going to be held accountable as early as those by-elections, but it's certainly a consideration. And I think what they want to show, even if it doesn't land on the 19th, is that talks are continuing, progress is being made. I think that's why it's so important that LeBlanc is seen in Washington right now. And I don't expect that on the 19th, all of that is going to shut down. If anything, those conversations will continue to ramp up, and that will be displayed to Canadians as well.
Okay, Tim and Jordan, I want to ask you really quickly about that. Do you think either of that, Tim, you go first, that'll have any effect on the by-elections at all?
I can't be as articulate as Amanda ever. I'll just give you a comprehensive no, won't have a damn impact at all. The only thing that might impact it if the converse were true. If suddenly Trump changed his approach and agreed to everything in Canada, all that has been empowering the Prime Minister, and the hatred that, or not hatred, but the disdain and frustration Canadians have towards the U.S. president that has helped Mark Carney may dissipate, but that ain't going to happen before August 19th.
Yeah, I think
or
for
the by-election date.
For voters that are concerned primarily about what's happening with Trump and tariffs, anytime Trump rears his head and puts more pressure on that issue, it does seem right now to favor Prime Minister Carney, in part because the Conservatives have really not gained any traction on that issue. But I do think that there are other groups of voters, and particularly younger voters, maybe in more urban areas, who are really concerned about things like the cost of living, who might have concerns about the Prime Minister's moves on issues like climate change and might disagree with some of those. And a by-election where there is at least one safe Liberal seat, probably two in there, where they can make those views known without changing the government might be attractive to some of them.
Okay, we are going to switch gears a little bit here, and we are going to chat about the news that Prime Minister Mark Carney made today when he was asked to weigh in about calls for FIFA President Gianni Infantino to resign after a recent controversy involving Infantino's plan to sell off parts of FIFA's commercial interests to private investors. Here's what the Prime Minister had to say about that.
I've run a few organizations in my time. The idea that proper governance is not to disclose to your closest advisors, your chief operating officer, your fellow board members, something of consequence that you're even considering, let alone proposing, that's fatal. But certainly I don't have confidence in Mr. Infantino after this point, given what transpired.
All right, tell us what you really think, Mr. Prime Minister. We each have 30 seconds for each of you before we run out of time. Tim, what's your thoughts?
Well, there's so much at play here, Katie. So having been part of an international sports election, I will tell you this. There's a Canadian by the name of Victor Montaglini, who is the president of CONCACAF, one of the organizations that expressed displeasure with Mr. Fantino. He may put up his hand to be president. Wouldn't it be great if a Canadian could run FIFA? The other thing I would say, two quick things. I hope we got our check from FIFA because they owe us legacy money, Canadian soccer and all of that. And Mark Carney's right. The way Gianni Infantino has handled this is shocking.
Jordan, what about you?
Well, I mean, I feel like I should just yield my time to Tim here.
Me too.
But I would observe that I don't think it's accidental that Prime Minister Carney came out at the same time that Andy Burnham did in the UK. There's obviously something coordinated happening here.
Absolutely.
I think many people, even people who are casual fans of soccer, have been extremely disappointed in how FIFA has handled this issue. And of course, the organization generally has a long legacy of corruption problems. So perhaps a change in leadership, it might be time, and I think the Prime Minister is probably in good company on this one.
Or perhaps is he just mad that he didn't get the FIFA Peace Prize, Amanda?
Maybe a little bit of both. I mean, there's obviously a growing chorus of influential voices who are weighing in on this. It's football legends, it's league presidents, it's FIFA insiders, now it's global leaders. I mean, this obviously isn't a sports story. It is a governance story. And it feels like despite the fact that he has weathered these storms before, these are former allies who used to defend him who are now out against him as well and calling for his resignation. So I think we can all see where this one is going.
All right, we are going to leave it there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on this lovely, delightful Wednesday Power Panel. Thank you, Amanda Alvaro, Tim Powers, and Jordan Likeness